Hi, it's Lilian, and today we meet again for a new lore video, a little bit particular. Indeed, it will be a video that will mix precise and exact information coming from the canon lore as well as from the non-canon lore as usual, but to which I will also add moments of pure analysis, as I could do it sometimes on videos like the one about Shinsu, but in more depth this time. You'll have to distinguish the facts from the analysis, because even if I'm quite confident about the interpretations I'm going to make, we can't say for the moment that they are accurate. So remember to keep a critical eye on what I'm about to tell you. Anyway, today we are going to talk about people whose abilities are both incredible and very mysterious. We are going to talk about the guides. They are those whom the tower has blessed with the knowledge of the paths that run through it. They guide people and sometimes are able to see the future and change it. Hence their name, which in Korean can literally be translated as one who chooses and opens the way. The position of guide is a special position for people who are capable of such feats. Being a guide is more of a status than a position, as they will usually occupy one of the 5 basic positions in combat. Guides are extremely rare, and only 2 human species seem to be able to become one: the Silver Dwarves and the Red Witches. I'll skip the details about their role in the fight since I already talked about it in the video about the positions. Here we'll see the strange characteristics of the guides, because the guides are a little bit different from the other beings in the tower. For example, the fact that Hwa Ryun is present at Bam's side violates one of the laws established by the Jihad Empire when the regular system was set up, since she failed the tests on the 2nd floor, so she shouldn't be able to go to the next floors. When Aguero asked Hwa Ryun what she was doing on floor 29 in chapter 54 of season 2, she simply told him that she could go anywhere because of her guide nature, which implies that guides are able to move from one floor to another without having to pass a test, as if they were approved by the floor administrators, and that their guide status placed them above the laws of Jihad, as if they were bound above all to the tower itself. This impression is reinforced by Evan's dialogue with Garam in the Floor of Death arc, where he says that even though he belongs to the Jihad family, he is still a guide first and foremost, and as such, he must preserve the paths of the tower, as if he had a duty to the tower itself, and that this duty came before anything else. Note also that according to Evan, even if he says it in a very small humorous box, the Silver Dwarves are an older and more important species than the 10 great families. Aside from that, SIU will reiterate in the note in chapter 215 of season 2 that Hwa Ryun did fail the 2nd floor and is therefore not really a regular. And he also describes a little bit the powers of the guides by saying that they can see the destiny, find things hidden in the tower, solve complex riddles, or avoid traps. He also says in the note of chapter 197 of season 2 that the guides are like human GPS that can predict the future, and thus guide people to the best thing to do, the best path, but that this doesn't make anything 100% sure. That it's not because a guide shows the path to follow that those he guides will be able to go to the end of this path, and that once you end up on the wrong path, you won't be able to do anything to avoid what you want to avoid. By the way, that's why Evan Edrock didn't show Bam the path he had to take to pass the test on the 1st floor, because he didn't think he could do it. In short, as I said in the video on positions, we can separate the powers of the guides into 2 types. This kind of omniscience that allows them to find hidden things, to get out of complex labyrinths, etc., and their ability to predict the future. But you'll see that, in my opinion, both of these abilities basically come from one power. SIU also said that in terms of prediction, the further away in time the prediction seems, the more inaccurate it will be. Note also that other people than the guides seem to have predictive abilities like Kelhelm, Jihad, or the Captain. However, they are not officially considered as guides, even if technically they could more or less take the role. We can also talk about the particular case of Hockney, who can see a few seconds into the future with the help of the eyes of Grande Jah, who obtained this power just by looking at Enryu when he appeared on the Floor of Death. But one of the most important details about their ability to see the future, to see the paths, is that this power is cancelled by the presence of the irregulars. Indeed, the presence of an irregular will affect the predictive abilities of the guides, making them blind in a way. In addition to not being able to predict the actions of individual irregulars, guides who are too close to an irregular will momentarily lose all predictive power as well as their sort of omniscience. Oh, and to be precise, this is important for later, the guide will regain his powers once the irregular is far enough away that he can no longer influence the course of events, but he still won't be able to predict the irregular's actions. Note also that this also affects Kelhelm's ability to see destiny, and that while Bam's presence does not prevent Hockney from seeing into the future, probably due to the power of the thorn that makes those eyes compatible. Since the thorn and his eyes come from Enryu, the latter gets a headache when facing Jihad and senses the arrival of Uruk, but cannot clearly define it. To try to understand why, I will have to do a little analysis and interpretation on the functioning of their power of prediction. But first, let's summarize a bit. There is a difference in the type of prediction between the Silver Dwarves and the Red Witches. The silver dwarves seem to perceive a global and blurred vision of events, while the red witches seem to perceive a punctual future in a much more precise way. Then there is Hockney, whose ability to see the future seems quite close to that of the red witches, since he can see a precise future, except that it is very short term, that he is not hindered by Bam, and that his power is reinforced even in the presence of Bam thanks to the influence of the thorn, as we could see in chapter 250 of season 2. And then there is the case of Kelhelm, who claims to see fate, which is actually a power similar to that of the guides, omitting their form of omniscience. There is also the famous captain, who seems to be able to see far into the future since he predicted the arrival of Bam to Dawan and Char. And finally, there is Jahad, who seems to have an even higher perception. Now, how do they do it? How does it work? Well, that's going to require a bit of interpretation, so I'll warn you to take what I say with a grain of salt. I also want to make it clear that this is not just the fruit of my reflection, but of a set of ideas that we developed by discussing with Electrica, Asriel and all, so the credit doesn't really go to me. I'm just synthesizing by explaining with my own words and adding my own ideas here and there. Well, first of all, we have to start from the principle that everything that happens in the tower is determined. That is to say that everything that happens there, by virtue of the principle of causality, is determined by past events and by the physical laws that govern this world, and that consequently everything is already decided in advance, that nothing can change, and that it is therefore theoretically possible to predict the future. This is what is called determinism in philosophy. Guides and people who are able to see destiny would therefore be what we call Laplace's demons, a term that comes from a quote by the philosopher Pierre-Simon Laplace, a great defender of determinism. He said this: "An intelligence which, at a given moment, would know all the forces of which nature is animated, and the respective situation of the beings which compose it, if moreover it were sufficiently vast to submit these data to analysis, would embrace in the same formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe, and those of the lightest atom. Nothing would be uncertain for it, and the future, like the past, would be present to its eyes. So to make it simple, it would theoretically be enough to know, at a precise moment, the state of all the forces and particles of the universe, to know their past and future interactions, and thus to know precisely the whole past and future history of the universe in the smallest details. Now remember my video on the Shinsu. The Shinsu is the basis of everything in the tower, it is present in everything. So to summarize this interpretation, the guides would be people able to read the Shinsu of the tower, and to know all its interactions at a given time in an instinctive way. This would allow them to know the future while having a certain omniscience at a given moment, because it would be the Shinsu that would make the tower determined, since it is the basis of everything. But this power would be limited, because they can't take everything into account due to the complexity of the Shinsu's interactions. This is why the further away the future is in time, the more blurred it becomes, because the flow of Shinsu is chaotic in the sense that, even if it is determined, its interactions are too complex to be predictable in the long term, and this reduces the accuracy of predictions. I refer you to my video on Shinsu, where I explain why the flow of Shinsu is chaotic, with the comparison with the London forces if you want more details. As for the lack of total omniscience, it would simply be explained by the fact that the guides can only read the Shinsu from a limited area, and not from the 134 immense known floors of the tower at the same time, which seems logical by the way. This idea that the Shinsu is linked to the predictive ability of the guides is further reinforced by the fact that the guides lose all their power when they enter the floor of death, where the Shinsu has no master since the administrator is dead, and whose flow is therefore very unstable. Maybe it is even the administrators, masters of the Shinsu, who give them these powers, but once again, this is only a theoretical interpretation. However, everything I am describing to you is shattered by the irregulars for a very simple reason. They come from outside the tower. Determinism works on a closed system, isolated in a bubble where nothing goes in and nothing comes out, where nothing is lost, nothing is created, but everything is transformed, to quote Antoine Lavoisier. But the irregulars break this isolation and disturb the whole tower. The future can no longer be predicted in their presence because they are foreign bodies to the tower, coming from a world with different physical laws, from a world devoid of Shinsu, and which is therefore not determined by it. The ability of the guides to read the flow of Shinsu to predict the future becomes useless. It is because of all this that Jahad is able to play Kelhelm so easily, to manipulate him by making him see a false future. For Jahad is an irregular with the ability to see the future. He is therefore able to change the future that he and the guides see as he wishes, while being the only one to know that this future has been changed, and how it has been changed. It may also be because the irregulars are free of any contract regarding the use of Shinsu. They can manipulate it as they wish without restrictions. They are people who break the rules of the tower and therefore do not depend on the administrator. Administrator who, I remind you, could be the source of the guide's powers. And this is also why the omniscience abilities are completely blurred when an irregular is nearby, because it is as if he came to contaminate all the Shinsu around him, making it unpredictable, chaotic, impossible to read and analyze. However, there remains a notion that seems to go beyond the determinism of the tower, and that is what Jihad calls fate. My interpretation is that this notion of fate refers to the determinism not of the tower, but of the entire universe of Talse Uzer story, a determinism that truly includes everything, both the tower and the world outside the tower. For me, it is this destiny that Jihad is talking about when he says he is able to control it at the end of the arc of the hidden floor, because he knows very well that classic predictive abilities, such as those of the guides, can do nothing against the irregulars, and thus his own companions, Urek, Baam, etc. But he seems confident enough to have taken this into account. However, he could not have foreseen Baam's resurrection because he is surprised to see him in the hidden floor, which shows that he probably only sees part of the overall destiny of Talse Uzer story, and that Arlen's prophecy, which predicts the arrival of Enryu, the return of Baam and the defeat of Jihad, is based on a degree of control over destiny that is even higher than his own, perhaps because Arlen has even better predictive abilities than he does, or perhaps because of the god of the outside. Generally speaking, I think there are several levels of understanding of fate. In fact, if you want to play it a bit meta, a bit Misei Abim, the story of Tower of God and Tasle Uzer story is determined since it is the author SIU who decides everything. Then the characters of the story manage to glimpse in part this destiny determined by SIU, but nothing says that they cannot be mistaken or even deceived, in the same way as Kel Helam with Jihad. Anyway, I'll stop here with the speculations because I'm going further and further away, and I let you make your own interpretations and theories about it. Besides that, in addition to the irregulars, there is also Emily, who disrupts the powers of the guides, though it's not clear whether this is due to Emily's nature or to the fact that Rachel, an irregular, is controlling her. There are a lot of subtleties and intriguing elements, especially next to the living ignition weapons and all, but I already talked about that in the workshop video, so check it out for more details. This is the least seen lore video, even though it is one of the most interesting. Also note that all guides must make a pilgrimage to the 43rd floor. We know that the Red Witches have to visit several places, based on the memories that are passed from Red Witch to Red Witch, and that the Silver Dwarves seem to have two possible places to visit, one in the center of the floor, where the body of the administrator resides, which is usually called the true floor of death, and the other one being more outside. It was the latter that Evan went to, which is why he did not know the center of the floor of death. It is also important to know that there are royal guides, that are given to the princesses of Jihad once they become rankers, and that Evan is the leader of these royal guides, as I had already explained in the video about the Empire of Jihad. Finally, one of the most mysterious points about the guides is Po Bida Gustang's fascination with them. Indeed, the scientific study of the guides is strictly forbidden within the Research Association, the research organization that Gustang himself created, as I explained in the video about the 10 great families and the one about the workshop. And some people think that this prohibition is due to the fact that he wants to keep all the research about them to himself. I'm going to go into a little more detail about the known guides, since I had to be quick in the positions video. So among the Red Witches there's Ai, the guide who helped the group infiltrate Heljo's castle in the Floor of Death arc. There is Suo, the guide who is currently serving the Elder of the Fug, Kel Helam, Hua Ryun, who doesn't really need to be introduced I guess since she is so much present, and Yuto, who, even if we're not 100% sure she's a Red Witch, is most probably one because of her complicity with Hua Ryun. Yuto is the masked regular who was in Reflejo's team, and who ended up leaving her place to Hua Ryun in the middle of the workshop battle arc. SIU said that we will see Yuto again later in the story and also confirmed that she was a regular. Then among the Silver Dwarves there is Evan Edrock, Yuri's guide, who I don't think needs to be introduced either. Alumik Edrock, the one who seems to be Jaina Repelista Jihad's guide, which is a good plan for him since she stays in her room. The job shouldn't be too hard. Well, joking aside, he must certainly help her in her schemes. And finally there is a third Silver Dwarf, even if it's a little more theoretical, so take it with a pinch of salt. It's the one who saved the fake Anak Jihad by hiding her. Knowing that the princesses of Jihad have the right to have a guide, it is very likely that it is the guide that was given to her once she passed Ranker. The resemblance he has with Evan is only due to the fact that he is also a Silver Dwarf. It can't be Evan since he seems to know nothing about the history of Anak and Garam. Anyway, as I said earlier, we can add those who have the ability to predict the future, so Kel Helam, Hockney to a lesser extent the captain even if it's still a bit vague, Jihad and maybe Arlen if we trust his prophecy. But in any case, they are not officially recognized as guides, as I said earlier. That's it for this little video. It's a change from the big 30-minute videos that there have been recently. It's a bit of a relief for me, we'll say, even if the complexity of the subject has made the video difficult to write. And again, there was a lot of interpretation, so take it with a grain of salt. I hope it helped you to better understand the logic behind the power of the guides, and that I didn't lose you too much in complex explanations. I did what I could to make it simple and understandable, but nothing is perfect. You can like, comment, share, and everything as usual. You can follow me on Twitter too, as I'll keep you updated there. And we'll meet again for the next lore video, which will be about weapons and items.